first tool you're gonna need is gonna be a paddock stand or a sport bike lift stand. Place the stand under the sport bike swing arms. We are gonna be working with a spoolless stand in this video. Place the left support under the swing arm. After it is in place, hand tight the jam bolt on the left support to secure it. Place the right support under the swing arm. In this case, with an Allen wrench, tighten the right support bolt in place.
Tighten the left support with an Allen wrench. At this point, push on the tail of the motorcycle to straighten the motorcycle, while pushing the stand down to lift up the rear end. Without turning on the engine, place the transmission on neutral. The tire must be able to spin for you to remove it. I use 2 wood pieces as tire chucks to stop the motorcycle from rolling back. At this point, I'm gonna take pictures of the indicator plate. Assuming your chain is already in the allowed chain slack specified by the manual, these pictures are gonna help you to adjust the chain slack to the service manual specifications with less effort when it has to be done at the end of installation. This is a close-up of the indicator plate and the notches. Using a 12mm wrench, loosen the 2 lug nuts on the end of the swing arm. Do this on the left and right swing arm. The lug nut towards the end is a jam nut, and the lug nut closest to the front serves to adjust the chain slack when you reinstall the tire. Loosen 4 lug nuts total on both sides. Loosen the 2 lug nuts on the right side as well. At this point, pop out the chain adjusting mechanism on both sides. It is not necessary to completely remove it. Using a 22mm socket, a breaker bar, and an adjustable wrench, brake torque on the wheel axle nut with the breaker bar, while holding the axle in place on the right side with the adjustable wrench. This nut is torqued to 64 foot-pounds, or 90 Newton meters. So it definitely takes some elbow grease to remove it. Using the 22mm socket, a ratchet wrench, and the adjustable wrench, remove the axle nut the rest of the way. Remove the axle nut, the washer, and the indicator plate. Push the axle on the left side with your hand and wiggle it back and forth using a socket and a breaker bar on the right side. Keep wiggling the axle while pushing. You're gonna get to a point that you're gonna be able to remove the axle by hand. Push the tire slightly forward and pull the chain back. Start removing the chain from the sprocket and put it to the side. Pull the chain out of the way to the left side of the sway bar. And pull the tire assembly back while holding the caliper. Make sure the caliper doesn't hang by its hose. put the axle, 2 indicator plates, a washer, and the axle nut together to prevent losing parts. There is also 2 spacers on each side of the tire that are gonna need to be removed and secured. At this point, you can take the tire assembly to a shop so they can mount the new
Tire
on your rim or wheel
for a far better price.
that if they had to remove it themselves. Make sure they don't need the brake disc or the sprocket removed. For most shops, you do not have to remove them.
Make sure to apply some grease to the axle. The manual recommends lithium soap-based grease. Once completely lubricated, place the axle back in the swing arm. Make sure the indicator plate goes with it. Make sure the spacers are lubricated with lithium soap-based grease. Make sure there's a spacer on the left as well as a spacer on the right. Here you can see the right spacer. Slowly place the wheel and tire assembly back in the swing arm. The sprocket should be on your left and the disc brake should be on your right. The hardest part is gonna be fitting the disc in between the brake pads on the ride. Obviously there should be a brake pad on each side and the friction material should be facing the disc. In this case I used a flathead screwdriver to push the brake pads and make space for the disc. Another thing to definitely watch for is that the spacers don't fall out of place. Once the holes are semi-aligned, start working the axle through the whole assembly. It's gonna take some wiggle and moving parts around a little bit to get it the whole way through. At this point, I messed with the chain adjusting mechanism until I could get the axle through. Once it was past the chain adjusting mechanism, I started putting the chain back on. I started by putting on the chain on the top of the sprocket, fitting the teeth of the sprocket in the chain segments, and rotating the tire slowly so the whole chain will fall into place. Then I pushed the axle in the rest of the way. Lubricate the washer with grease. Place from right to left indicator plate. Washer and axle nut hand tight. Check the picture that you took at the beginning. Look at where the indicator plate was on the notches on the swing arm and adjust by tightening the lug nut that is forwardmost in the swing arm using a 12mm combination wrench. Tighten until the indicator plate marks the right amount of notches. Tightening the lug nut will pull the mechanism back and tighten the motorcycle chain by also moving the whole axle back. Once the indicator plate indicates the same notches as in the picture, tighten the second lug nut by hand. Repeat the process on the right side. both sides should be even. Therefore, the indicator plate should mark the same amount of notches on both sides. Once you are done with adjusting, tighten the second lug nut by hand. Torque the rear lug nut to 11 foot-pounds using a 12mm deep well socket and a torque wrench. You may or may not need to hold the forward nut in place with a normal combination wrench. Torque the rear lug nut to 11 foot-pounds on both sides. Spin the wheel a few times so you can find the tightest position in the drive chain. That is where it has less slack. Take out any kind of measuring tape or a ruler and make sure the tightest point in that chain moves at least 1.77 inches but no more than 2.17 inches. Or at least 45 millimeters but no more than 55 millimeters. If the chain is not within measurement, you have to readjust using the two nuts on the back of the swing arm. Using a 22mm socket, a torque wrench on the left side, and a 19mm socket and a breaker bar on the right side. Tighten the axle nut up to 64 foot-pounds for 90 Newton meters. Loosen the jam bolts on the stand. And lower the bike by pulling up on the stand and stabilizing it with a hand on the tail of the bike. Pull out the stand and you're done.